Now, as a part of what we look at in the management and the planning process of our auditing, we have to remember that there are those laws and regulations that are going to apply to almost every organization. And, they could be in compliance to government rules or maybe other external requirements, maybe contracts they have with some of their other, not competitors, but companies that they're working with. As an example, I know that one company that did credit card processing, they manage the little boxes where you swipe your cards. Every time they go to another bank and say, we'd like to be able to process your cards, they would go through an audit to make sure that the credit card processing met the level and requirements of that are that bank's responsibility. The bank would say, okay, we have this type of regulation, we have these requirements of security, and if we're going to work together, you need to be able to meet those standards. And so it could be, like I said, external requirements, something that's related to the computer system practices. Now, a lot of these, as you look at these different regulations, often are going to include information about how data should be processed, transmitted, and stored. Even duration of storage. In some organizations, they're required to keep email for at least 7 years. Special considerations should be given on the issues for the highly regulated industries. These considerations should include all of the countries in which the organization operates. Now, that's an important statement. Imagine if you're an internet service provider, and you, of course, have laws and regulations you have to follow as an ISP within the United States. But if you also are working with customers in other countries, you have to also make sure you're in compliance with their set of laws and regulations. And when you consider how many countries are still in the developing stages, especially in catching up on the internet technology, those are things that could be constantly undergoing change. So you need to make sure that you are, again, back to something I said already, knowledgeable about the laws and regulations, that you have those skills, that understanding is a part of the information gathering, and you use it in the audit planning. All right, what are some of the other effects of the laws and regulations? Well, privacy issues. As an auditor, you need to take into account any of the requirements of privacy laws and regulations. As an example, the safe harbor in Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, what they call the OECD. And by the way, there's a lot of alphabet soup throughout the auditing process, right? Lots and lots of acronyms. Anyway, they have the guidelines that govern privacy and trans-border flows of personal data. So again, we need to understand what those regulations are, how they apply to that organization, if at all. Now, some of the regulations that you should consider could be things like the establishment and organization of regulatory requirements, the responsibilities that are assigned to the organizations, any financial, operational, and other IT audit functions that would fall underneath those regulations. Now, there are two major areas of concerns when we're talking about these regulations. One, of course, is the legal requirements for us, the people doing the auditing, the auditors. There are laws and regulations and contractual agreements that we have to follow under. There's also legal requirements for the auditee. That would be requirements for their systems, as we said, their data management, reporting. And those two areas are going to impact the scope and objectives of the audit. Again, if you think about examples, Sarbanes-Oxley and HIPAA are perfect examples of regulations that do affect how we are going to conduct the audit and the requirements that the auditee has to undertake. Now, we can look at some steps that you should follow as the IS auditor to determine the organization's level of compliance. One of them is identification of requirements that are dealing with things like electronic data, like personal information, copyrights and e-commerce information, computer system practices and controls, and how they store information. You should also be looking at the documentation of the applicable laws and regulations, determining if the organization is planned to support those regulatory requirements. Make sure you know if the organization has addressed any adherence to the applicable laws, and if there are established procedures that they use to follow those requirements.